All right, folks, welcome back. Today we are going to be looking at the DBQ. That's right, you can tell I'm wearing my workout gear because this is going to be a workout. So I hope you're ready for this. We're going to be looking at the body portion of the DBQ today. All right, so the DBQ stands for document-based question. It is worth 25% of your grade. This is the most valuable part of the written portion and arguably one of the easier parts because they give you all the documents. All right, it's one question, and you have 60 minutes to complete it with a suggested reading time of 15 minutes. So they're going to give you 7 documents, and you've got 15 minutes to read through the documents and the question, kind of formulate your arguments, and then they suggest 45 minutes to write. So 7 documents, 6 must be used. You have no option, but hey, why not use 7? The DBQ is out of 7 points, while the LEQ is out of 6 points, and so we're going to look at a number of those points today. Hopefully we'll be looking at the evidence and analysis in this video. All right, so when we're looking at DBQ, it's broken down into a few parts when you're writing. I have another video you guys should have watched already about the intro thesis claim, right? Your opening paragraph. And then after that, remember in the thesis I said you need to have A and B, right? You need to have 2 claims in there, 2 parts to it. So we're going to look at body part 1 and body part 2. Then your closing paragraph and your extra evidence is something we'll look at another time. But we're looking at the 2 bodies today. Now remember, if you do an ABC, meaning you have 3 parts, you'll have 3 bodies. If you just do A, you'll just have kind of 1 body. Now, when I say body, I don't mean paragraph. You can have more than 1 paragraph, but just kind of think of it like that in chunks. And so today we're going to be looking at body part 1. So what we're going to look at now, we've already looked at this part of the rubric, so we're going to move on to the next part of the rubric here. So the DBQ, evidence from the docs. This part down here, evidence beyond the docs, we're going to look at later, but from the docs. All right, number 1, uses the content of at least 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt. We don't really want to pay attention to that one. We want more than 1 point. We want the 2 points. This is easy 2 points. So 2 points is supports an argument in response to the prompt using at least 6 documents. And so all you have to do to get 1 point is to just address 3 documents. Just bring them up, right? If you just use the content at all, you get 1 point. But if you want the 2 points, you need to support an argument in response to the prompt of at least 6 documents, all right? So that's what we want to do. We want to be able to support an argument of at least 6 of the documents. And so let's break that down a little bit. All right, so looking at this, we're looking for evidence from the docs. So you need to use 3 documents for 1 point, describe, and just like I mentioned, and then but 6 documents for 2 points for an argument. So you might as well use 7, right? Do this for all 7. So at this point too, you should have already grouped your documents into 2 separate claims. You should have been like, all right, documents 1, 4, and 5, they look great for this claim, and then the rest of the documents look great for this claim. Oh, it's gonna be perfect. You should have them already grouped together. Then the next thing you want to do is you want to check those sources, right? Like who wrote it, and if they're famous, make sure you use that doc, right? If you're not sure about time, you don't know if you'll be able to use all your docs. If there's a famous person in there, use it. Then also be aware when was it written? What is the context around it? When was this doc written? So you're getting ready to write. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to summarize the document to support the claim. Tie it back to your thesis or claim. All right. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. But as you are doing your evidence portion, you're just going to summarize the document. It's super easy. That's going to get you your 1 point. But then you're going to tie it back to your thesis or claim, and that's going to get you that argument point. That's going to get you that 2nd point. This should be no more than 2 sentences. All right? You should not need more than 2 sentences than this. Do not use quotes. All right? Whatever you do not use quotes. You will not get the point if you use a quote. Now, you can use 1 or 2 words. You can say, like, and this is shown by the fact that he says this, right? But only use 1 or 2 words. Don't use more than that. Another thing that I noted in every single one that I saw that got the point, in parentheses after each summary, they put the doc number. Now, you can still get credit if you put in document 3, it says this, right? But you can do that, or you can put it in the parentheses behind. But anytime that somebody decided to just let the reader guess, they did not get the point. So don't make it very clear what you are analyzing, which document you're analyzing, and when and where, so that the grader knows exactly what they're to look for. All right, after you've actually done these first 2 sentences of evidence, and we're going to talk more about that, at that point, you're going to do your analysis or sourcing, and we'll talk more about that later. That's happy, though, for those of you guys who remember. We're happy. All right. So let's look at an example here. All right. So here's the prompt. Evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. So if you've watched the other videos, we've already looked at this prompt, and I'm actually using a thesis that we've already used. Although the arrival of the Portuguese was a very important change in the Indian Ocean maritime trade in the 16th century, the Portuguese never extended their control beyond a few ports and had to compete with Indian merchants and regional states such as the Ottoman Empire and the Sultanate of Aceh. Therefore, it did not completely transform trade. Now, we're going to be looking at document 4 today, so I want you to pause it now and go ahead and read the doc. So pause. All right, welcome back. So here we go. Let's look at a evidence piece. So here we go. We have the thesis. we have the prompt. You've read the document that it's referencing. So here we go. The letter by the ruler of Aceh asked the Ottoman Sultan for help against the attacks of the Portuguese. All right, so does this evidence get 1 point, 2 points, assuming all the docs are the same, or 0 points? Go ahead and pause, write down what you think is the answer now. All right, the correct answer is it gets 1 point. Right, the letter by the ruler of Aceh asked the Ottoman Sultan for help against the attacks of the Portuguese. They've used the doc. All right, they've provided evidence. It does not get that second point for providing an argument. All right, so let's look at another example here. Same prompt, same thesis, same doc. All right, the ruler of Aceh, Alauddin al-Qahar, wrote to the Ottoman Sultan complaining of the devastating impact of the Portuguese had on the long-distance trade from all the ports of Indonesia, as well as the pilgrimage from Aceh to Mecca, and is requesting military assistance from the Ottoman Sultan. This shows how the Portuguese were unable to completely control the trade because they had to compete with the Ottoman Empire. All right, pause now. Let me know if you get 0 points, 1 point, or 2 points. Go ahead and write it down. All right. If you said 2 points, you would be correct. So let's look at this. One, they've summarized the doc, right? They've talked about this first sentence here. Sorry. This first sentence is all about just defining what's in the, giving a short summary of the doc. But then we have this shows how, right? We have meaning that they're using language here that shows that it's an argument. So this shows how the Portuguese were unable to completely control the trade. And the other key part here is it ties back to their thesis, right? It shows how they're not able to completely control the trade because they had to compete with the Ottoman Empire. So it ties back to the thesis, but also to the claim B, right? So we have a couple of claims here, A and B, and this ties back to claim B, right? And so you want to make sure that when you're writing that, you're being very clear on what you're trying to tie it to, and you're always tying it back to your thesis, every single one that you do, all right? And so this right here is how you get the evidence, right? This is the evidence portion. Pretty easy. Now we're going to move on to the analysis sourcing portion. All right, so we have intro, we have body part 1, body part 2, back to body part 1. Using the source to support the claim, we have our evidence. Now let's move on to analysis. So let's look at what the rubric actually says. For at least 3 documents, explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. To earn this point, the response must explain how or why rather than simply identifying the document's point of view. This is really important, right? How or why, you not just identify. You can't just put the intended audience was this, all right? You need to actually explain like how you know that, or how is it shown, or why do we know that? And so we're gonna look at a couple examples of that in a second too. But first, let's look at actual analysis, right? And what are our options here? Most of you have heard this acronym before. HAPPY, historical context, audience, purpose, perspective, and why it's significant. Now, why it's significant is something you can ask yourself as a follow-up to each of these, right? Or why it matters. So any of these you followed up with your why at the end. But really, we're focusing on the HAPPY right now. All right, so some notes. It only has to be done with 3, right? You only have to do it with 3, but more wouldn't hurt, right? Why not just do it with all of them? If you're doing it with 1, you might as well do it with all of them, all right? Another really important note here is prompt the sentence. The purpose of Carpini's letter is blank. Use these words. Make it super clear. There is no question about what you were trying to say, right? The purpose, the audience, the historical context. Use those actual words, right? I cannot emphasize that enough. And use and is shown by. The purpose of Carpini's letter is blank and is shown by blank. Do not say the word biased, right? You are not analyzing the credibility of a source. You're analyzing why they thought the way they did, right? So there is a moratorium. You will lose a point in my class if you use the word bias. So just don't use it, all right? You can describe how the author's feeling though, what his or her motives were, what they're hoping to communicate, accomplish, etc. You can describe that. The other thing is no first person. And that just goes for all of your writing in this class, right? Don't say I think, right? Do not use first person as you're writing this part. All right, so let's look at it. Historical context is, if you use historical context, you're going to write a sentence which describes the situation, explain how the document participates in that historical trend or process. If you use this one, if this is one of your analysis, it cannot be something you have in your contextualization, and it cannot be something you have in your extra evidence at the end. So be mindful of that, all right? This is what your sentence should look like. The historical context of this document is blank, right? So that's what your sentence should be. All right, if you use audience, go beyond what is noted in the source line of the document. Credit for extended analysis of a document will not be granted for mere repetition of an audience identified in the source line. All right, translation, if it says, Dear King Steve, don't be like the audience was King Steve, right? You need to give a greater depth to who and what that audience is. So the audience intended, or the author's intended audience was blank and is shown by blank, right? So that's what you need to remember as you're writing that. Purpose. Why or for what reason was the source produced at the time it was produced? What was the author's goal? All right, so making sure you're identifying what was the purpose of this, what was the goal. The author's purpose in writing this was to blank and is shown by blank, all right? Or perspective, right? Where are they coming from? Put simply, to do perspective, identify an important aspect of who the author is and explain how the author's personhood might have impacted what they wrote. So again, if you use perspective, this is where the temptation is to put bias in, and you don't need to do that, right? But being able to say like, oh, well, this person was a Jesuit monk, and so a Jesuit priest, so they would have viewed things this way. So the author is blank and influenced, impacted by blank, all right? Impacted blank by blank is how you want to do that. The author is blank and influenced blank by doing what? By blank, all right? So this is your analysis portion. So let's quickly here look at an example here. So using the same of everything we've used, same prompt, same thesis. We have the same, for document 4, we've got the same evidence. So now let's look here. The intended purpose of this letter was an appeal to a fellow Muslim ruler to support them in fighting off the Portuguese. And this is shown by a repeated flattering of the Ottoman Sultan and how he calls the Portuguese infidels and emphasizes the danger they pose to the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. Does this get the sourcing point? Pause, decide. Yes. Yes, it does get the sourcing point. And we actually have two, right? As I put here, we have an audience not very strongly based, so they wouldn't have gotten it for just that. But the fact that he got the purpose here, they have the full purpose of, and how it is shown. It is shown by the flattering and what it comes down to. So essentially what you're going to want to do in the writing of the body is this. Do this paragraph right here 7 times, right? Tying it back to your thesis on each one. Do that 7 times and you're good to go. You guys are ready for your DBQ at this point. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. All right, guys, this should be a quick video, but I do want to touch base on the last 2 points of the DBQ rubric real quick. So we've talked about intro, thesis, claim. We've talked about the body, evidence, and analysis, part 1 and 2. So now we're going to look at the extra evidence, closing, and then we're also going to talk about complexity, the ever-elusive complexity. First, though, let's look at the extra evidence. So extra evidence should be a part of your final paragraph, right? After you've done your 2 body parts, you're coming in, and what it is, and so let's look at what the rubric actually says. Uses at least one additional piece of the specific historical evidence beyond that found in the documents relevant to an argument about the prompt. To earn this point, the response must describe the evidence and must use more than a phrase or reference. This additional piece of evidence must be different from the evidence used to earn the point for contextualization. So here's what's important with this, right? You need to have any evidence that actually, though, needs to be relevant to the prompt. You can't just say, oh yeah, something else was happening in the world at this time. If it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it has to be relevant to the prompt. And then one thing and then also it cannot be part of your contextualization, right? It can't be something that you've used somewhere else in your essay, right? So it needs to be something on its own. Now, it introduces any piece of evidence that either supports or refutes one of their claims, but refutes helps with complexity. So this is an important thing of note, right? You need to, one of the things that's useful is that if you actually use it, the opposite historical claim, so, right? If you use it to refute a claim, and that shows that you're able to see both sides of it, so it adds to the complexity. Remember, all the way back to your thesis, you had although X, right? So again, what it could be is something in support of X, right? You can provide some evidence of X, but it doesn't want to be anything that you've already mentioned before in your contextualization, right? But so it need to be outside, but it could be something that supports X or supports something else in one of your claims, right? But you want that complexity there. It's an easy point to grab as long as you've got it. Make sure you are really clear. Again, you could prompt the sentence and say, evidence beyond these documents shows this, or an argument for evidence beyond these documents, right? Being very specific and clear will help your reader or grader. So then we have the ever-elusive complexity. All right. Apparently at this point, everything I've seen and read, it means it's really hard to get. So one of the key things here, the very key point of the complexity, is it must be found throughout, right? And they are cracking down on that. I guess originally you could just kind of pick one of these and then add it into your paragraph at the end and chalk that point up, but it actually has to be found throughout your whole paper. The point, the way it says here in the rubric, demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument. So there's a number of different ways you can do this, right? Explaining nuance, explaining both similarity and differences. Really, if you go through this, what they're really looking for is, can you explain both sides, right? Do you have depth in there? But then you also need to add it in throughout your prompt, throughout your essay, I mean. And so being mindful of that as you go through. Explaining relevant and insightful connections within and across periods, all of that, right, can be interwoven through it. But you need to make sure that it's found throughout, and that the easiest way to do it is by showing both sides. All right. I hope this helps narrow it down for you a little bit as well with these last 2 points. Good luck on your DBQ, everybody.